Okay. Hey, everybody. I was going to say it's Wednesday. Is it just me? Ever since the year turned to 2025, I can't remember which day of the week it is. But happy whatever day it is. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for joining us for our Alitu focus session on podcast hosting, where our intent is to demystify, or I should say, make clear all the confusing things so that you'll understand how podcast hosting works, who has which responsibility, all that good stuff. So let me just make sure that we are live on YouTube, and then we're going to get started. Soon as, okay, yep, I see we're live on YouTube. If you are here with us, please just throw a thumbs up in the chat so we'll know that that is working. And then we can kick off. Our format for today is that we are going to walk through, well, I should say Graham is here for those of you who have reached out to us in support chat. You know Graham, and Graham is here as well. But I'm going to walk through some slides to kind of set things up, and then we're going to open it up for your questions. So you can go ahead and type your questions in now, and Graham will star them so they show up in our question box here inside the live stream, and we can answer those for you before we leave today. If for some reason you stump the Schwab and I'm unable to answer the question, I will send you an answer after the fact. Okay, so does anybody have any? Yay! Hi, Evolve Recovery. Thank you for your thumbs up. Okay, so I am going to just set up my slides over here. And I guess I should have done this before we got started, but I was too busy talking. So let me share this screen with you. And all right, let me know if you cannot see that. Otherwise, I'm going to believe that you can. And I'm going to present. Okay, so you're here because you're a user, one of our fabulous VIPs for Alitu, and we're going to walk through what podcast media hosting is. Why do you need a podcast media host? What do they do exactly? What is that RSS feed thing we're always talking about? We're going to talk about the podcast directories, what those are, and how you get into them. And then we'll talk about podcast catchers or listening apps. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to answer any questions that you have about how this whole podcasting hosting thing works. So let's start with media hosting. When you decide to have a podcast and you get your first microphone and you sit down, you record your episode, you edit it inside Alitu, and then you're all excited. You're ready to send it out in the world. How does that happen? With a podcast media host. You should have a host that is specifically designed for podcast hosting. Why? If you have a website and you don't have a server of your own, say you're on shared hosting, which is what most of the cheaper hosting services are. So if your website hosting is like $10 a month or under, you're probably on shared hosting. Most of them have in the fine print of their terms and conditions that you cannot use their shared hosting for something like a podcast. If you do, and they discover that, they could shut you down because they're sharing the servers, and podcast files can be large, much larger than text like you would have on your website. It can run up the bandwidth and cause their server to slow down, which affects everybody else who's sharing that server for you. And of course, when you're launching your podcast, you want your podcast episode to be downloaded by as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, for as long as possible. So you don't want to gatekeep your audience from getting to your podcast episodes because your host wasn't designed for that. So if you use a dedicated media host, then you'll get filtering, you'll get accurate and useful download stats, and you won't be shut down for your podcast becoming more successful. What's a dedicated host? Well, Alitu provides dedicated hosting, but there are several other hosts that I'm going to talk about as well. But it is important when you're doing a podcast that you have a media host for your podcast that is separate from any other hosting that you might have. Now, what is your RSS feed? Well, this is one of the most important things that your podcast media host provides. This is your podcast's address on the internet. So an RSS feed, which looks like this in here, I know you can't see that very well. I'm going to show you an RSS feed a little later, but an RSS feed to you will look like gobbledygook. But what it is it contains all the information about your podcast, who the host is, where your media files are, your podcast artwork. All of that information is contained in your RSS feed. And podcast directories need your RSS feed in order to include your show in their directories, which you also want. Because the way your podcast gets from wherever you recorded it into your audience's ears is through that RSS feed. So I'm going to remind you again, if you have questions as I'm going through, or if I'm being very New Jersey today and I'm talking too fast, you can just pop that into the chat and Graham will let me know that I need to slow down. Okay. All right. I'm going to keep going. Podcast directories. What are podcast directories? This is where your listeners go to listen to your podcast. Now, if you have an Alitu hosted podcast website, or you have a website of your own, you could very well have people come to your website and listen to your podcast episodes on that site. I have that happen all the time. However, the majority of people who listen to your podcast will listen to it in a podcast directory. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube Music, Listen Notes, Amazon Music. There are a lot of podcast directories, iHeartRadio, Podchaser. So if your audience is going to one of these directories to listen to your podcast, or let me say this, if they're going to one of those directories to listen to podcasts, you want your podcast to be there so that you can be found. So you want to submit to as many directories as possible, and you will use your RSS feed to accomplish that. Are there any questions? Whoops. Any questions so far? I'm going to keep going because I don't see any notes popping up yet. Okay, so, before I leave this slide, why is there an asterisk on Apple Podcasts and another asterisk on Podchaser? One of the questions we get from podcasters a lot when they're first starting out is, how can my audience talk to me? How do I know if anybody's even listening to this? You know that they're listening if they leave you a review or they send you a note. These two directories, Apple Podcasts and Podchaser, enable people to leave you a review. So you'll sometimes hear a podcaster say, "Oh, I got a 5-star review. I was so excited." That means somebody went into one of those directories and left thoughts about how they enjoyed their show, or what they wanted to hear on their show, or people they wanted them to interview, right? People use the reviews for all sorts of things, but basically they're giving you free feedback about your show. So you want to make sure, even if you don't want to submit to all these directories, though I don't know why you wouldn't want to, but if you don't want to, make sure you submit to Apple Podcasts and Podchaser if you want to hear from your audience. Now, I know Spotify is either in the process of rolling out or is rolling out something that might enable to have people to have conversation with you as well. You'll find that I talk about Spotify separately from the directories a lot because they don't behave in the same way as all the other directories. Okay. So then what's a podcast app? That is the app that your listener uses to actually listen to the app. So Apple Podcasts is both a directory and they have the Podcasts app that comes on all the Apple devices. But there are lots of other apps, Pocket Casts, Castro, Podcast Addict, Good Pods. There are a ton of different podcast apps. Some of them, many of them are free, some of them are paid. If your podcast listener has already become accustomed to Pocket Casts, you don't want them to have to go to Apple Podcasts to listen to your show. So they will go into Pocket Casts, find your show there, and continue to listen. You cannot, as a rule, there's going to be an exception, but you cannot submit your podcast directly to an app unless that app is also a directory. I know that sounded slightly confusing, but it really does make sense. If it's a directory, you can submit your show there. If it's an app, the app talks to the directory on behalf of your audience. Okay. So what does Alitu include for you? Alitu includes, with your monthly subscription, hosting of up to 1,000 downloads a month at no additional cost. If you go over the 1,000 downloads a month, let's say your podcast is just on fire, Okay, first of all, yay. Second of all, if you're getting 2,500 downloads a month, after 2 months of that, we're going to reach out and say, wow, look at the success of your podcast. We're going to ask you to upgrade to the next level. And the next level is only $10 a month, up to 10,000 downloads a month. Okay. So the joy of this is that Alitu's hosting is integrated right into the publishing process. We'll provide codes for you use embeddable podcast episode players if you want to add those to another website that allows you to add HTML code. We'll give you a free podcast website that you can use as a destination if someone just wants to go and check out all of your podcast episodes at one time. Alitu will also provide right inside your dashboard download statistics. So when you publish your episode, you want to know, okay, did anybody but my mom and dad listen to this? Alitu will let you know that. It'll let you know if people listen to it in a particular state or with a particular player or with a particular browser. Those are the kinds of stats that you get from podcast specific hosts. And then it's totally immodest, but I'm going to say Alitu comes with stellar support because I'm talking about Graham and Judy. Okay, and me. So that's what Alitu already includes for you if you're interested in checking out, if you're interested in moving to the podcast hosting stage. You already have all of these things right inside your Alitu account. So let me cover some questions quickly that we get often. Can I move my podcast hosting once my show is live? The answer is yes. But if you ever pop into support and tell us you want to do that, our first question is going to be, why do you want to do that? When you select a podcast host, all your statistics live in the dashboard of that podcast host. If you move from one podcast host to another, your stats don't follow you. So you can download the final stats from your previous hosts, but those stats are not going to show up in your new host. So if I have had 100,000 downloads at my host and I move to the new host, my dashboard's going to say 0 podcast downloads until my podcast streams up again. Because the podcast hosts do things so differently one to another that the podcast statistics don't transfer. So yes, you can move your podcast hosting once your show is live, but you'll want to make sure you follow the instructions inside your podcast host's help desk to make sure that your audience follows you. There's some specific steps you follow as far as importing your importing your podcasts to the new host, and then using a change of address called a 301 redirect. So your audience doesn't have to do anything different to find your show. They just listen to it in the same app they've been listening to, and they don't have to update your RSS feed. So yes, you can move your podcast show hosting. Second question is, should I move my podcast hosting? And guess what? Our question is going to be the same. Well, why are you thinking that you should? If the podcast hosting you're using is working for you, if the price is right, if the features that you're getting works for you, there's no reason to move your podcast hosting unless your host shuts down. That's a different situation. And your host should absolutely give you some warning before they do that they're shutting down so that you have an opportunity to migrate your show somewhere else. Now, this is probably the question I get the most. If I quit my hosting, so let's say they're hosting with Alitu. If I quit Alitu, if I cancel my account, including my hosting, does my show stay available to my audience? The answer is no, unless you move your podcast to another host. In order for your RSS feed to stay in the directories so people can find your show, you must have a host that is hosting the RSS feed. So if you quit your hosting, your show will not stay in the directories. If I quit my show today, let's say I'm hosting with Buzzsprout and I cancel my Buzzsprout account today, that doesn't mean my show is going to disappear tomorrow, but the directories will check my RSS feed a certain number of times. And when they determine that that feed is broken, they will remove your podcast from their directory. So if you want to switch hosts, it's important that you move to a different host if you want your show to stay available. Let me know if there are questions about that. So sometimes you'll submit your RSS feed to a directory and you'll say to us that it does not work. Well, there could be a number of different reasons why it doesn't work, and usually the directory will tell you. So when you reach out to support, if you say to us, they said my RSS feed didn't work, If you tell us what they said to you, then we can help you figure that out. It's usually one of two things. You forgot to pick the categories in your podcast details so they know where to publish your podcast episode, or you forgot to include your show artwork because you must have show artwork in order to have your RSS feed in a directory. And your artwork should not just be a picture of you. So don't just grab your LinkedIn profile picture and make that your show artwork. It should be a specific cover art that everyone will see when they're listening to your episodes. So why doesn't your RSS feed work? Reach out to support and we'll help you figure that out. Why does the Alitu integrated hosting stop working? As a rule, it shouldn't. It's all in one place. If your hosting stops working, reach out to support as quickly as possible. But what I'd ask is reach out. We're not here 24 hours a day, but we are in 3 different time zones to make sure we cover as much of the clock as possible. But don't delete anything. Don't resubmit. Don't panic. Just reach out to us and we'll help you figure out why it has stopped working. Sometimes your feed, if you've made a lot of changes to previously published episodes, sometimes your feed rather just needs to be refreshed. It's usually something very simple. So that's the same with any host. If your host suddenly stops working, or your feed stops working, or your episodes have been in Amazon Music and all of a sudden new episodes you publish aren't showing up, reach out to your host because it's usually something very simple and you don't have to do a lot of work on your end to fix it. Okay, now let me stop sharing and come back over here and see. Okay, I see that somebody couldn't see the screen I shared. Oh, but they could see now. Oh, I was about to say, well, that would be terrible if I was presenting all that time and you guys didn't see it. Um, sorry, the 4 was my cat. Oh, your cat's typing on the keyboard. Okay, that is hysterical, Emma. Do we need to sign to all of these apps? So it is free to submit. And I would say in podcasting, one of the glorious things is that you're the boss. So nobody could kind of tell you what to do, but we can make suggestions on what might work for you. I would submit to all of those directories. And I would submit to Apple Podcasts first. It's a little bit more involved, but we have step-by-step instructions for you right in the Help Center. But the reason why I say you should submit to Apple first is by submitting to Apple, you're submitting to like 9 directories at the same time because there are a bunch of directories and podcast apps that pull their information directly from Apple. So by submitting to Apple, you're submitting to multiple. Just like I would say the second one I'd submit to would be Amazon Music. Why, Allegra? Because by submitting to Amazon, your podcast also gets submitted to Audible. So if you have friends who are really into Audible, they could be listening to a book and all of a sudden they're listening to your podcast. How cool would that be, right? So I would submit to all of them because you never know where your podcast listeners are going to come from. It doesn't cost. If someone tells you you have to pay to submit your podcast RSS feed, walk away from them. You don't have to like bop them on the nose with a newspaper like they're a naughty puppy, but walk away from them because submitting your show to podcast directories is free. But yes, submit to all of them because you never know where your biggest audience is going to come from. And one of my favorite stats to look at when I look at my statistics is where are people listening? Because I'm always fascinated how many people might be listening on my website or on my podcast website or on Apple Podcasts, for instance. So I would submit to as many of them as possible. You never know. You could be a huge hit in Amazon Music and you're not getting tons of downloads on Spotify. Now that I mentioned Spotify, Alitu will offer up your download statistics no matter where your file is pulled, except Spotify. So if my show is in 20 different directories, Alitu knows every time somebody downloads your podcast from one of those directories because they're pulling the file from Alitu. So we can see that they did it. We see their IP address, so we know that it wasn't a bot. If it's a bot, we discount it. So you can trust the statistics inside Alitu. Spotify is a little bit of a different bird. I guess they're not a bird. What are they? I don't know. I'll think of an animal for the next time we do this. But Spotify actually uploads your files when they get your RSS feed to their own servers because Spotify, well, I'm not going to tell you why. I don't work there, but they upload your files to their own servers. So if you want Spotify statistics, you have to log into your Spotify dashboard. There is some technology that enables them to share that with others, but they have not shared it with us and several other hosts. So if you do want your Spotify statistics, you can just log into your Spotify for Podcasters dashboard, and the statistics for shows, the statistics for episodes that have been downloaded from Spotify will be in that dashboard. Oh, okay, I see you've done Apple and Spotify. Oh, you're trying to figure out how to get on Amazon. In the Help Center, there's an article that shows you how to submit to Amazon Music. It's much simpler than Apple. So if you've done Apple, you're a rock star. You can easily do this one. All right. Are there any other questions? I feel like I talked really fast, but I had tea, which I usually don't have, so I'm a little hyper today. Okay, great. Got the thumbs up from Emma. Graham, do you see any other questions? I'm not looking at YouTube. I'm going to pull you on in a minute so I can actually hear you. I think I can see you shaking your head, but I'm not sure. All right. It's not a speak now or forever hold your peace situation. If you have a question that comes up after this session and you think to yourself, oh man, I wish I had remembered to ask whatever that might be, you can just reach out to us in chat. So you can either send us a note at help@alitu.com, or in the lower right-hand corner of your Alitu dashboard is a little purple, looks like a smiley face. Just click that and it will open up chat and it will send us a note. You don't have to be sitting there staring at your screen to get a response. Most of the time, we'll respond within a couple of hours. But if you're not sitting at your computer when we respond, we'll just send it to your email. So you'll have the response right inside the chat box, as well as a direct response that goes to your email. So you'll know that we saw and answered your question. Okay, let me see. Graham, I'm going to add you for a hot second. Hey, Graham.
Hello, hello.
Can you tell me if there's anything you think I forgot about podcast hosting?
I'm trying to think. No, I think the biggest one we get is, no, I was going to say, when you were talking about the errors people sometimes get, you have to have published an episode in Alitu before you could submit.
That is excellent. That's a really big point. See, this is why we tag team. Yes, if you submit your RSS feed and it's empty, as in there's no episodes, then the directories don't have anything to respond to.
Mhm.
So if you want your podcast to publish, for instance, if you want to launch your podcast on a particular day, don't wait until that day to submit to the directories. That's an excellent point, Graham.
Yeah. So
Submit
even if
it
it's
like
just
a week ahead.
Yeah, and even if you don't have to have a full episode ready, but if you want to be submitted, it can just be a trailer, something like that.
And if some of you are now saying, what is a trailer? A trailer is like a 1 to 2 minute sneak peek, like a movie trailer. Or if you're watching a TV show and they say next week on The Good Place, right? And they show you a few scenes of what's coming up. That's what your trailer is. We have a script in the Help Center, and we have an article on the podcasthost.com that is linked in the Help Center. And all it is you're telling people what your show's about, how often you publish, when they can expect to hear from you. But if you submit that trailer, then you can make sure that your podcast is already in all of the directories. So on launch day, when you tell people, hey, my first episode is out, go get it, they'll be able to go get it. But definitely do that in advance and submit it before you need it. Kind of like if you want your first episode to publish on Wednesday at 10, don't just log in to do it Wednesday at 9:55.
Yeah.
Just give yourself a little grace, because it's technology and sometimes stuff happens. That's a great one.
Yeah. And with Alitu hosting, you can schedule your episodes to publish as well, can't you? So
Yeah, that's awesome. So if
in
I
case
know
you-
I wanted to go out Thursday at 10, I can schedule it. I'm just saying, right? Thursday
Yeah.
at 10, I might be distracted. But if I set it up before that, like I tend to batch my podcast episodes, and I'll do like 4 in one day, and then I'll schedule them all. Like on Sunday, I'll sit down and say, okay, when do I want this one to go? But if I schedule it in advance, then it's like my podcast just showed up by magic, and I seem much more together than I might actually be. Those are great. Scheduling. I feel like there's something else I missed because of the question we got the last time, but I can't think of what it is.
The only thing I could think of on statistics, maybe we could, because we don't get Spotify statistics, do we? If you're looking at your hosting dashboard.
Yeah, I did say that part, that you have to go to the Spotify dashboard. Okay. Well, I'm going to do last call. I'm going to wait one more minute. I'm counting it down. If you have any questions, speak now or forever hold your peace. No problem if you don't. We will put this replay up inside our community, inside IndiePod, in the Alitu user area, so that if you're watching this later, welcome to the IndiePod community, Alitu area. If you have any questions afterwards, you could just post them beneath the video inside Alitu and we'll answer them right inside the community. Oh, that was brilliant. I love that. Emma's good for us.
Yeah, thank you, Emma. Oh, we got a question from Rebecca.
Okay.
Is there anything else we should do with the RSS feed? That part is still a mystery to me.
Is there anything else we should do with it? So once you have well, I will say two other things about RSS feed. You shouldn't change it, because if you change it, you break all the people who are subscribed to you in all the different directories. So if your RSS feed is generated by Alitu, that's the first thing I'd say. Don't change it. So don't go in there and edit it and think, oh, I want it to like match the name of my show. Your listeners don't see your RSS feed, so it doesn't matter if your RSS feed is branded, right? So don't change it because that breaks the relationship you've already established with your listeners. But your host hosts the RSS feed for you. There's nothing else that you should need to do with that. You just submit it to directories, because there's new directories all the time. So the only other thing I would do with it is, you can go to podnews.net. Yes, I think Graham's going to pop that in for you.
Yeah.
If you go to podnews.net, it is a daily news site that's all about podcasting. No, I'm not giving you homework. You don't have to go start reading that site. But in the upper right-hand corner, you can search for the name of your podcast. It is so cool. And then when you click on your podcast, it will show you all the directories that your podcast is in, and it will show you all the directories that you are not in. So I would check that out after a couple weeks and make sure that I'm in all the directories that Pod News is tracking, just because you want your podcast to be in as many places as possible. So if you think about your RSS feed as your web address for your show, then there's nothing else that you would need to do except submit it to directories.
Yeah.
Okay, that was a great question, Rebecca. Did that make sense? Okay, podnews.net. I'm going to post that right here, podnews.net.
It's funny, I tried to post it on YouTube, but it didn't show up. I wonder if it's...
Maybe because it was a link. I don't know.
Yeah.
But I just posted it in here, so it's https podnews.net. Okay, there. I put it in there twice. And let me show that on the screen. That's very helpful. Thank you. You're very welcome. But yeah, that's an awesome site for figuring out where your show is. It will also tell you, I'll just tell you right now, whenever I peek out there, it tells me this show does not have a trailer. And I'm like, I know. But it will tell you if the show has a trailer, because if people are in there searching around just looking for shows and they just want to listen to the trailer to figure out what your show is about, it will let folks know, hey, there's a trailer. You can go find out about this show right now. And I'm missing that opportunity because I have not yet published my trailer. But every time I get ready to publish it, I change it. So, and I'm getting ready to change it again. So, oh, all right. Okay, we have another few minutes. If there's any other questions. Does your cat have any questions? Oh, let's see. All right, we're going to do going once. I feel like I need to allow for the delay for people typing and it's showing up on my screen. We could have Graham sing. Just kidding.
Oh, no, you would not want that.
I've never asked you that before. Do you sing?
I do not.
You do not. Okay. Your cat's watching with intent. I like that cat. All right. Well, go and have a glorious day. Yeah. We hope to see your episodes soon all across the Webiverse. Also, if you're first releasing your episode, if you'll pop into chat and let us know, you never know. We might just show up out there where your show is. Alitu has had fabulous customer service. Oh my gosh, I'm blushing.
Yeah,
Thank you
thank
so
you.
much for being great for non-techie people. Thank you, Rebecca. That's our aim. While I am a true nerd, anybody who knows me will tell you that. I do think it's a superpower to be able to. I'm bilingual. I can speak nerd and not nerd. So thank you guys for coming, and we will see. Oh, wait, next month. When are we coming? We're coming March 13th, and we're going to be talking about editing.
Mhm.
So if you have another topic that you'd like us to cover for a focus session, just let us know. You can either pop that in right now in the comments and we'll write that down, or just let us know in chat. You could just pop in there and say, I'm having a lot of questions. For instance, Rebecca, you could have popped in and said, I'm having a lot of questions about the RSS feed. And we'll put together some quick training because podcasting can be complicated.
Mhm.
Is it okay to be that honest? It can feel complicated when you're getting started, but then once you get it going, it feels magical.
Yeah,
So just
exactly.
let us know what else you need. Okay. I'm going to move this up here because I want to take a screen grab because Rebecca just made my day. So let me just grab let me just grab that for posterity's sake. Thank you
Yeah.
so much. All right, guys.
Thank you.
We'll see you next month on the 13th, same station.
Bye-bye.